Good morning, members, officers and any members of the public who are viewing the live stream of this meeting. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee. My name is Councillor Michael Atkins and I'm the chair of this committee. Please can those present in the council chamber note that everything on your desk, including your laptop screen, is likely to be broadcast at some point. The camera follows the microphone being switched on, so councillors and officers are advised to wait a few seconds before speaking to allow the camera to catch up. If you're participating in the meeting via the live stream, please indicate that you wish to speak via the chat column and don't use it for any other purpose. Make sure your device is fully charged and that you switch your microphone off unless you're invited to do otherwise. Please ensure that you've switched off or silenced any other devices so that they do not interrupt proceedings. Please use a headset when speaking and hold the microphone close to your mouth. And when you're invited to address the meeting, please make sure your microphone is switched on. And when you finish addressing the meeting, please switch it off immediately. Speak slowly and clearly, and please do not talk over or interrupt anyone. We've got quite a full agenda to get through today. I'm going to suggest that we take the key amnesty project at the end of the meeting if there's time, and potentially that and the 6-monthly strategic risk report may get deferred to the next meeting, depending on how long we need to cover off the other items today, particularly given some exciting interventions from the national government and DLUC. So, on with the rest of the agenda as printed. Item number 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence. Patrick, are there any apologies for absence today?
Yes, Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Helen Leeming.
Thank you. Item number 2 is declarations of interest. Do any members have any interests to declare in relation to any item of business? If it becomes apparent later, please raise it at that point. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Chair. I have my usual declaration of interest as a non-executive director of Ermine Street Housing.
Thank you very much. Councillor Stobart.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to underline that I am a director of South Cambridgeshire Investment Partnership and also South Cambridgeshire Project.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. And Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. The Greater Cambridge Partnership is referred to in 3 places. I'm a member of the Assembly. Thank you,
Councillor Williams. Thank you very much. Item number 3 is minutes of the previous meeting. Are members happy to approve the minutes of the meeting of the committee held on the 1st of June as 2023 as a correct record? Does anybody have any corrections? No, if so, I move that we take those as a correct record of the meeting. Thank you, seconded by Councillor Sanford. Oh, sorry, Councillor Howe.
I'm sorry, Chairman, I've just noticed, as it's been pointed out to me, that the County Council is mentioned several times throughout the report, and therefore I am a County Councillor. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, I'll take those minutes as approved then, and I'll sign those after the meeting. Okay, item 4, our first substantive item, is an update on the external audit of the 2020-2021 financial statements. I believe we're joined by Mr. Russell from Ernst & Young via the Teams chat. So, Mr. Russell, could you, and Ms. Dawson, could you please present this report? Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chair. So the report in front of you sets out the progress to date on the 2021 audit. You'll note in our introduction that we've talk about the timeline, which was, which is an ambitious timeline that we've agreed with officers. We've been working for the last 2 months. It's been pretty pressured, I think, from both sides, and we've made some significant progress. So the report just sets out sort of area by area in the audit, those areas that are completed and those areas that are still underway, and also gives you an indication of why that is and whether or not there are any findings to date. So you'll see from your page 13 that it's a pretty clean position in terms of findings to date. And all the way through to page 15, you'll see that there are just 1 or 2 minor areas of information that we're still awaiting on the majority of those points to there. Then from page 16, you'll see that we've explained to you in a number of places just quite what's holding the audit up in terms of information that we're still requesting from the council, or where they've struggled a little to get us the information in the right format for us to be able to undertake our work. And you'll also see that there are just a number of points where we're identifying some issues which need to be corrected in the accounts, for example, around the categorisation and classification of COVID grants, which were in 2021 a hot topic. So there will be, when we report our final results report, a number of amendments that have been made to the accounts as a result of the audit process. But I think the main message is, good progress, some significant improvements in the process and the quality of information that we're receiving from the council, but a few areas where it's still a little bit, there's a little bit more work to be done, and there will be a number of adjustments coming through as a result of the work. Our intention is to continue on beyond the end of this month to try and finish out all of the areas that are listed in this report. And that should give us a good position then to be able to bring you a final results report at the next meeting.
Thank you. Mr. Russell, did you want to add anything before I turn to the room?
No, I don't think so. Covered by Janet. Thank you.
No, thank you. Mr. Maddock, did you want to add any comments before I open this report up to the floor?
Just to say that, I think the teams have worked together really well. I think there's been good collaboration, between the teams. I think I'd agree with Janet. It's been quite tough for both teams, really, because, there's a lot of information flowing in a fairly short period of time. And given what's happened in past years, it's happened over a much longer period. So I think it's been a pretty positive experience from our side as well, and I hope so from EY's side.
Thank you, and thank you for those updates. It's one of the more positive reports we've received at this committee, I think, on this topic. So yes, I'll open this up to members for further comment. Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair, and through yourself. Can we just check the adjustments that were referred to? I take it they're technical adjustments and not anything that would affect the cash basis of the council. It was referenced about format. Can we check that the external auditors have been clear with our officers as to what format that they want the information in? Missing information to check that all of that has been passed on and Mr. Maddox is aware of it. And how are we doing on the timeline for EY to finish and complete in their agreed slot?
Thank you. Ms. Dalton, can I turn to you first on some of those items?
Yes, so at the moment, the adjustments that we've identified don't affect the cash position of the organisation. If we're talking about the bottom line, I think it's too early for us to be able to give you that overall position because we haven't completed enough of the work to be able to determine whether or not there would be an impact on the CIES, but nothing that I'm aware of at this point in time that would affect that. In terms of format of information, absolutely, we're crystal clear as to the structure of the information that we require, and that is all dealt with through our client assistance schedule in advance of the audit. So we set all of that out and then discuss what that looks like with the auditors, with the officers before we commence the work. So no difficulty there. And as far as I'm aware, the information is coming back to us. So as we put a request in, the turnaround time to get that information back from Peter and the team has speeded up significantly. You probably want to refer to Peter to determine whether or not he feels he's on top of that and has the full list being worked on and turned around back to us. So in terms of the time slot, now clearly we had hoped to have finished the fieldwork by the end of July, but as you can see from the report, there are a number of areas where we haven't had the information quite yet in the format that we need. So we will extend our time over the next fortnight to be able to complete that work. So we have resources booked and allocated to this audit to get it finished rather than pulling out and coming back in.
So I think what I would say was that, when we set off on this process, we set the 2-month timeline. I think we probably realised it was really quite tight, really quite difficult. So, and I think it was flagged quite early on that there was a risk that the fieldwork probably would potentially go into August. So it's really helpful that EY have taken that on board and been able to provide some resources just to finish off the last few items. We have regular meetings. So we have a meeting with Mark and his colleague. I think it's every Tuesday to sort of check on progress. We also have internal meetings to see how things are going. My colleague Fazana Ahmed has been leading on this, and she's been very much on the case, very much sort of assisting where she can and making sure that colleagues are replying to audit as quickly as they possibly can. I can't pretend there's not been one or two hiccups along the way, but generally I think it's gone really well.
Thank you. Councillor Williams, would you like to come back in?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Refreshing change, I think, was sort of along the lines of what you were saying earlier. It's very good to hear. It's good to hear Ms Dawson compliment our officers on the improvements, and credit to the team for doing that.
Thank you. If I can just come in here, just on these COVID grants in particular, I'd just like to understand kind of exactly where we are. So I guess my questions would be, is this the kind of audit work where you've reviewed a sample, you've identified some, and now you need to go back and check them all, or have you already in fact checked them all? And then the other question would just be around the materiality of those which were incorrectly accounted for. I mean, either a sort of either a pound figure or, out of this much in COVID grants that the authority handled, we found, this percentage were categorised as, agency when they should have been this, or just give us a bit more of a flavour perhaps of what your audit work has uncovered here.
So I'll answer that one, Chair. Thank you. So the COVID grant work and concluding that work is currently still in progress. So I think as our audit plan referred to, the risk around the classification was due to the how it's accounted for as a principal versus agent grant. The council provided an initial working paper when we started the audit that showed that determination from the council of how those grants were split. But what we found was the actual accounting that flowed from that classification assessment made by the council wasn't wholly correct. And there are some adjustments in the accounts, in the draft accounts, that don't follow the requirements of the CITFA Code of Practice, even though the classification made by the council was reasonably correct in terms of how they'd split between principal and agent. So what we're doing at the moment is working with the council about what the impact on the accounts are, and in terms of what adjustments are required to the accounts to make them reflect the requirements of the CITFA Code of Practice. In terms of our testing, I think we're pretty much 90% of our way through the testing. So our testing is about how much income the council has received and how much expenditure they've then expended or passed on in terms of that grant, which then gives you your net position, which sits in your accounts. So we're almost there with the testing, and that's quite a big amount of testing because the level of COVID grants received are in the tens of millions. So there's tens of millions of income and tens of millions of expenditure, but it really is down to the accounting treatment at the end of what has happened to that net balance. And I think at the moment it looks like about £5 million is incorrectly accounted for. But as I say, we've not fully worked through those transactions, so I couldn't give a definitive answer on what the impacts are through the accounts.
Thank you. I imagine we'll therefore get the full blow by blow in the final audit report with the adjustments in the usual manner. Good. Are there any further comments from members of the committee on this report? Oh, Councillor Heather Williams.
One thing in the sort of style of the report, if I could just say, I appreciate we've got the sort of coding for the completed to not started, but naturally some of these categories will take more time than others. So what might actually be helpful is to have sort of a percentage of the audit as a total, because it could be, for example, we've got, one or two pages, but actually they're really minor things compared to what's complete. So then it would give public view that 80% or 20%, whatever it is, some sort of percentage just to make it a little bit more open and transparent and accessible to the public, I think would be very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Heather Williams. Perhaps the partners could take that away and have a think about how they can improve the transparency of, as you say, kind of progress to completion. That would be very helpful. Well, if there are no other comments, I'd like to thank Mr. Russell and Ms. Dawson and the rest of their teams, and indeed Mr. Maddock and their teams. I know you've all been working incredibly hard over the last few weeks, and I think on behalf of the rest of the council, I think we can all say that we're very grateful. This is a key priority for the council, of course, to get this work done in an efficient and timely manner. And we know that takes a lot of hard work. So thank you all very much indeed. And I will let you return to that work as soon as possible. Thank you very much. So we were asked to note the progress, and we have done so. So we'll move on to item 5, the final accounts position statement and catch-up plan. So this is a report on the progress being made to bring the accounts and audit up to date. Could I ask Mr. Maddock to please present this report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So over the last sort of couple of months, we've been talking to the EY team about what sort of timetable we might put into place to try and get the accounts up to date. So you'll see at paragraph 7 a short table showing the timetable that we propose for the next few years' accounts. Broadly, it's looking at doing 2 cycles per annum until we catch up. One thing to note is that when we get to the 23-24 accounts, we will change auditors to KPMG. So at that point, we will obviously have different auditors. So there is a sort of a little bit of a sense of urgency in getting this up to date, so that when KPMG come in, they can take over as soon as they possibly can. So that's really all I wanted to say on that report, other than to say that things have moved on slightly since the report was published. We had a letter from the Department of Levelling Up, Housing and Communities, specifically from the Minister for Local Government. And this is an issue that they have been looking at over a period of time. And they put in train some proposals to get authorities' accounts up to date. I think I refer in the report to some figures around that only about 19% of accounts for 21-22 had been audited within the timescale. They've quoted that now as 27%. So there's obviously been significant challenges around the arrangements that have been in place in recent years. You know, obviously the audit firms have had difficulties attracting staff, retaining staff. So it's basically become a very challenging situation all round. So central government have taken this on board, and between now and the end of December, they're going to come forward with some proposals on how they might speed up the process, get accounts up to date. One of the comments they made was that it's important that when auditors are auditing, they audit up-to-date accounts, because obviously that gives us more of an idea of what's happening in the future. I believe either Janet or Mark might like to comment on this point as well, because obviously they've received the letter and they may or may not know a bit more than me, to be honest. So I'd like to hand over to
Thank you, Peter. Yes, Ms. Dawson, Mr. Russell, do you have any further comments on this intervention?
Yes, so we also received the letter, but have been working with the various stakeholders in the background. So the department and the Financial Reporting Council in particular have taken this forward because, as they say, and as Peter has referenced, you know, there's a concern that due to the number of delayed audits, the assurance for the taxpayer is not up to date and not focusing on the current information and the current issues that are taking place within local government, because there's an awful lot of attention, time and capacity being spent on delayed audits, which actually doesn't give you that comfort and assurance about what's going on in your local council up to date. So they've made some quite radical proposals about putting in a backstop date by which if accounts haven't been prepared and approved and audited, that the auditors would then be able to disclaim their opinion and move on. And also that the 22-23 scope of audit, which is set by the National Audit Office, so for 22-23 and for some future years, may be reduced so that it focuses on information that is seen to be of more value to the taxpayers, rather than spending significant proportions of our time looking at, for example, valuations of property, plant and equipment that the organisations are very unlikely to sell or change the use of, or what have you. So there are some really quite dramatic proposals on the table. That the purpose of reducing the scope of the audit would then be to allow time for SIPFA, who set your reporting framework, to really have a look at that and drastically overhaul that to make sure that it is slimmed down from the 150 to 200 pages worth of financial information that you have to produce each year, that is really very complex and difficult to understand for your key stakeholders of your council taxpayers and members. So there's sort of two objectives: one, to get the delayed audits all dealt with, and two, to streamline the process going forward so that this situation doesn't occur in future, and the information and then the audit is focused, so the financial information reported and the audit are both focused on what is actually of value to the reader of the accounts. So that's the overriding purpose of this. But as Peter has said, there's a lot of work to be done by all of the stakeholders, certainly in the next 6 to 8 weeks, so that then the Minister can produce a report in September, and then by December to actually have enacted some change to the system.
Thank you both very much. That's a really helpful update. I'm going to take this in two parts. So I'm going to suggest if we'll take any comments first of all on the proposed timetable as written, and then if anybody has any questions about the latest interventions and changes, then we can take those afterwards. So, are there any comments on the proposed timetable that people want to make? Councillor Heather-Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Just that I do note the reference about looking at a shorter period and being more realistic, and I do think that's a sensible approach.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any questions about the recent interventions? I mean, I might kick this off quickly. I looked and I couldn't see that any of these sort of drop-dead dates had actually been published yet, and how this might therefore affect this timetable. Do you have any further insight, Ernst & Young, as to what those might be, or when we might know what those are, perhaps?
So various dates are being looked at by the DLUC team with FRC, and they're very keen to do is ensure that it provides the maximum assurance possible whilst dealing with the delayed audits and getting rid of what they term the backlog. So they are modelling. That's probably the best way to describe it. They're modelling different dates. There's a proposal, for example, that audits of years up to 2021, or no, 21-22 may have a common backstop date, potentially at the end of this year. So if they're not done by 31st of December, they then may fall into that disclaim and move on position. But as you know, none of those dates have been published yet, and I think we can expect to see something in the report from the Minister in September. We too are hoping that they move quite quickly to issue those, because it then allows us to consider how best to apply our resources to deal with the proposed changes and move quickly, because clearly we have a significant number of audits to do and a very large team, and we want to make sure that they're employed on the most appropriate work over the next 12 months as well.
Thank you. That's a helpful. That's helpful to get some sense of what's being discussed anyway, even if it hasn't been agreed. Obviously, kind of comparing that to our proposed timetable, we were per our timetable, 21-22, the audit would only be complete in March, so we would be a few months beyond the December date. I don't know if that has implications then as to when we need to prepare the 21-22 accounts and whether that's something we need to accelerate so that they, I mean, because currently they're due to be ready in November, and I wonder if we need to bring that forward or if that's even feasible, just to give us a bit more time this side of Christmas. I don't know what.
Yes, we need to think quite carefully about how we're going to deal with this, and you know, probably have some conversations with Mark and his colleagues in the interim. So yeah.
The only other question I had is, I mean, thinking back through the audit plans that we have reviewed over the last kind of year as to your work, I'm not struck that there were huge, great tracts of it that seemed like a complete waste of time and therefore shouldn't be in the scope of future audits. So I can't quite see at this point what a reduced or more focused audit would look like. I guess we have spent a lot of time talking about, say, the valuation of investment properties and things like that, but those are quite material balances for us. So I don't know if you have a sense at this point, you know, for South Cam specifically, you know, in the past we've spent a lot of time looking at X, and it's possible in the, you know, that for a year or two we might reduce that. I don't know if you have any sense of that at this point.
So if I just start general first, Chair, there's been a lot of pushback from local government in particular about the amount of effort that goes into valuations of property, not necessarily investment property, but the other assets that you use, schools, different parcels of land, you know, across the system. There are a whole swathe of different types of holdings that are valued on various different bases, for example, depreciated replacement cost or you know, some sort of equivalent use valuation, which takes time from the local government, you know, the council perspective, to get valuations, to then reassess, to then put those transactions through, and then for the auditors to get their specialists involved and have a look at that as well. And there's a lot of criticism about the fact that that can take a significant amount of time. Investment properties aside, though, because clearly those are ones where organisations are making decisions to invest to make some sort of return, and that's an important measure that I think stakeholders are interested in. The other area that has been criticised is the amount of work that's required over the pension liability number, given that the, you know, actuaries are involved in assessing that, rolling that forward. We then use our specialists to have a look at that, and the view is, what value does that give to the reader of the accounts? Other areas that have perhaps under debate are financial instruments, and the complexity of, you know, do people actually understand what that's telling them about the business of the organisation? Probably not a lot. So those are the areas that are in the sights of the minister and their team. So for South Cams in particular, what it would do is just reduce the amount of audit effort focused on those areas. But clearly there's a balance to be struck, and that's what the working parties are doing at the moment over the summer to determine, is that a safe reduction that we could implement and explain to the readers of the accounts, so that they understand what assurance or not they have over those numbers that are presented. But those numbers would still be presented in the accounts at this point, because SIPFA haven't yet changed the reporting requirements on those.
Thank you. That's very helpful. And I have, to be fair, you've reminded me of the pensions issue, which does always seem, you know, it's something completely outside of the control of the council, and so to spend a lot of time thinking and worrying about it when it's essentially a number that's sort of given down from on high and gets put in the accounts, I think there's perhaps some scope there, as you suggest. Councillor Heather Williams, you wanted to come in.
Thank you. Yes, pensions, I think, is the obvious one that's really could do with. I mean, the fact that accountants are dealing with pensions in general just sort of winds me up. Since that change, you know, it's completely really just inaccurate, really. But the other thing that I think would be very good for government to intervene on is when it comes to sort of professional debate And I say this because sometimes a lot of time can be taken up over things that are very, what I would refer to as pedantic, because quite often you've got something that could equally be argued that should be classified as one thing or another. It has no material effect. I think we have had a case of this before, and lots of time and lots of things get taken up by something that's completely immaterial. So what I think some of the feedback that's been given, and that I would hope to see in any reforms, is that so long as it is defendable, so long as the council has a defence for its adjustments and its classification, and it's not, illogical, like it's revenue rather than capital or something that's completely out there. I'm going to use something really basic, like a pen. Is it stationary? Is it things that are 12 months, things that are, and we get into these classification rows in the chart of accounts. I forget what it was. We had something last year that was very much a judgment-based system. So I think actually more emphasis on just a difference of opinion being okay, but not having to impact and affect the accounts. I think that's very much what I'd like to see, because sometimes I feel like we're literally arguing over if it's a millimetre that way or a millimetre that way, sort of analogy. But so that's definitely what I've fed back anyway, Chair.
Thank you. That's some helpful feedback, and certainly these drop-dead dates, I think, will certainly focus the minds as to what arguments are worth, what discussions and debates are worth having, and to what extent. I've got Councillor Harvey, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Stobart.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and through you. And apologies if I haven't been following this carefully enough, and the question's already been answered. But in the disdain and move on, I think that was the phrase you used, Janet. That would there not be a danger that if something came to light that had been missed, say, I don't know, say it's 4 years ago, because we'd skipped over that one, would that not then potentially ripple through all the subsequent years that have then been signed off, and could be in a situation where you had to sort of revisit sort of several years of signed off accounts? How would that work?
Thank you. I think it was disclaim and move on. I think was the, the expression.
Disdain,
disdain works nearly
right,
as well. Yes. It's a good point how it affects kind of the opening balances moving forward, and if we what's the risk of missing a kind of major issue. I don't know if anybody feels like they want to comment on that.
I'm happy to give it a go. So you're absolutely right, Councillor Harvey, that is a risk, that you disclaim a set of accounts, which then means that you haven't got assurance over the opening balances. A transaction could have taken place in that period, which then has a knock-on impact into future years. But in each year, you would then assess what you're looking at and whether or not that has an impact. So where has it come from, and what would you need to do to correct it? Would you correct it in year, or would you need to report it as an issue that had arisen from the disclaimed period? So the issue with disclaiming one period and then moving on is that you don't have that assurance that you're bringing forward, and therefore you may carry forward some of that disclaimer through 1, 2, or even 3 years until it's worked through the set of accounts. But each year we would be looking at the transactions, the assets, the liabilities, and their source. So we would be able to identify if there had been a problem in previous years, because we would be reassessing it for the first time, in effect, to determine that it's being accounted for correctly. One of the proposals that the Minister is looking at is whether or not there's a deemed opening balance position. So if you have had a number of years that have been disclaimed, the auditors are instructed to deem those opening balances as assured and move forward from that position, which would knock out that potential implication of ongoing disclaimed balances over a number of years for an organisation. So it would get you to a clean opinion more quickly, which would be a good thing. The other element of the proposals is that we would not move away from the value for money assessment. So we would give an up-to-date value for money assessment, which would look back over the periods where there had been disclaimed financial statements, and it would bring that all up to date. So if there was a concern about potentially level of debt that the organisation was getting into. And I'm using these as general examples, not specific to South Cambs, but level of debt or potentially housing developments, and transactions, the way in which that was structured or being governed, and that we had a concern about it, we would still be required to report that so that the local stakeholders were very clear on our view as to whether or not the arrangements were appropriate or not. So that also gives us that opportunity to go back and have a look at significant transactions and decisions that are being made by the council and give a view as to whether they're being made appropriately or not.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I mean, in some ways, this may interact with the fact that we're obviously going to change audit firm for the 23-24 accounts in any case. And whilst obviously auditors are used to placing some assurance on what the work of previous audits, I would still naturally expect there to be a little more kind of review of the opening balances at that point, because they obviously, they're going to be responsible for providing assurance going forward. So it may be that I suppose we might build up a few disclaimers through 21-22 and 22-23, depending on how our kind of timelines interact. And then we might try and achieve a kind of clean bill of health for 23-24 once we're kind of a little more up to date. But I suppose, that would need the agreement of KPMG to spend perhaps a bit more time looking at the opening balances than they might otherwise be expecting. So I guess these are just the sort of discussions that we're going to need to have over the coming months. Did you want to come in, Mr. Maddock?
Yeah, so I think based on what Janet said, I think I would agree with her on the areas that probably present less risk, and there's a lot of time invested. For us, council dwelling valuations in particular, obviously we lose properties via the right to buy, but generally the intention is to hold them for the long term. There's what I consider a slightly arbitrary formula on arriving at an existing use value for those properties. And anything we can do to cut down on the work in relation to that, then I think I would probably support that.
Thank you. Yeah, no, it's an excellent point, specific for us. Councillor Stobart, I think you indicated a while ago.
Chair, thank you. So on the face of it, the proposals we've been talking about, and Janet's been taking us through some of the implications, look fair and reasonable. So transparency, prompt delivery of audit opinions looks like a good thing. But I'm just wondering, in our current kind of period of time, there is a change of government in sight. I'm wondering, this seems to be the kind of thing that would carry through a change of government. But I wonder if there's some risk around the implementation that we could be thinking about and doing the core things, but perhaps leaving some things open so as to be efficient, if there was a change of emphasis through a change of government. I think Janet nicely summarised some of the risks, but I'm wondering how the risk landscape changes with this new regime. And for example, we touched on some treasury aspects, valuation of land and properties, whether there will be new risks introduced into the risk register as a result, and whether that deserves some early thought. So just a couple of things, change of government and also the risk landscape. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I think it would be, I think maybe when we've got some more details, it should perhaps be included in the strategic risk register that assurances might be, more limited for a period of time, and therefore that will, that has a knock-on impact, I guess, as to the risk of, say, a fraud not being detected. Although I would hope with the kind of narrowed scope that the areas most susceptible to say fraud or misstatement would still be kind of covered. But it's a good point. I think that we should reflect that in our own thinking about risk and our strategic risk management. I don't know if anybody wants to comment on how this might change if, obviously there will be a general election, as you say, in the not too distant future, which, will lead to a change of personnel regardless of outcome normally. But I haven't picked up any sort of opposition dissent to any of this. I don't know if anybody wants to comment that that other members of the current government or opposition or future governments might take a very different view. It seems a little unlikely, but I don't know if anybody wants to come in on that? No, I'm not seeing any.
Shall I?
Yeah,
Shall I just? So I think you're right, Chair. That there's sort of two different levels. So there's the national political level. You know, Lee Rowley, the minister, has determined that this really needs to be dealt with, this situation and the fragility of the system. But actually, everything else that needs to be put in train operates at the next level down, so typically within regulation and then within the code structures, both from SIPFA and from the National Audit Office, and then from the FRC. So I think that once it's set in train, actually it drops down a level, and those organisations, it becomes part of their business as usual and what they're primed to do. So it would be unlikely for it to sort of resurface at national political level again, would be my assumption at this point. It's not a first priority issue for political parties as I can see it. I hope that helps.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really helpful clarification. Did you want to come back in on anything?
No, Chair. Excellent answers. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Councillor Heather Williams, thank you.
I would just strongly advise that the committee sticks to what we're dealing with and the information at the time and not politicise anything. Surely whoever is in government will want the best for local government.
I'm sure that would be the case, and I apologise if I gave any impression to the contrary. If there are no more comments, I think we've gone through this report in some detail. So thank you. We've been asked to note the current position and the breaking updates, and I think we have done so. So item 6 would be the key amnesty project, but I'm going to move that to the end of the meeting, just in case we have time, and move straight on to the internal audit plan and opinion. So could I please ask Mr. Tully to please present his report? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning to all of the committee. We're on page 29 of the report pack, and the purpose of this report is to communicate the next 6 months of work we've got lined up, also to provide feedback from the previous 6 months, and really just report on the control environment and provide my opinion. We do, of course, now, as you're aware, provide regular quarterly reports to you all. So there will be a significant element of it which will be repetition from those, but it's a good opportunity to just take stock and reflect on some of the work we've done over the sort of past 6 months. I apologise, it is a long report. We do like the committee to support our charter and code of ethics, so they're attached as an appendices. It's good to review those on a regular basis and get your support. This year we've only made formatting changes, but we'd like to include these. It helps demonstrate our compliance with public sector internal audit standards and gets your support. So to just pick out some of the key points from the pack, starting on sort of page 30, we explain our background. So this is where we talk about our regular sort of more agile 6-month plan now, where we look at work for the next 6 months, but we come back to the committee on a quarterly basis. It's really important that we remain agile because the pace of change is great and significant. So I would then go on to Appendix A, the plan itself. And for some of you who've sat in the committee for a while, you're probably quite familiar with this, but it's just helpful to highlight some key points for those who are new to the committee. On page 35, section 3, this provides an overview of how we identify work to include in our plan. Some work will be mandatory and some of it will be risk-based. Also on page 35, it's important that we reflect about our resources. It's important to recognise that the work that goes on in councils is very complex and diverse. So we'll never be able to audit the whole council in a single year, so it's worth making you aware of that. And so we prioritise the work we do according to risk and demand. On the following page, on 36, we explain the assurance type of work that we do. Simply, it is sort of core work. It may be mandatory. It may be sort of dictated by central governments. Good examples of that are where we do grant certification work to provide assurance back to them. Or it could be risk-based, or it could be third party. So that could be where we take assurance from where partners have done some audit work. Or that could be external organisations, things such as peer reviews or ISO certifications. So moving on to page 37, we highlight our themes for the year based on the work that we've outlined we'd like to do. So it's good to just try and categorise and get a feel, a flavour of the work. It's broadly the same as the previous year. What I would say is there's more of a focus on regulation and safety, and that's because we're doing some work in sort of housing compliance. It's a small paragraph, but I always think it's important to stress that we do undertake follow-up work. If an audit review had a limited assurance rating or there are high levels of recommendations, we would probably follow that with a specific audit because it's important to make sure that those actions are implemented. Moving on to page 38, we look at our resources for the year and we split it according to different categories of work. I would say it's broadly the same. There still is a lot of demand for core work and grants being delivered, which we've outlined in our forward plan. And I would say perhaps one thing that has changed is governance, risk and control work. That's increased perhaps compared to the previous year. Partly a reason for that is cyclical. There's the National Fraud Initiative, which we investigate potential cases of fraud and error, and that's a sort of biennial exercise. A lot of matches come through there, and we're in that part of the cycle, so that's why that's increased. But we're also anticipating work to support some projects in the council, and we've detailed there for you. So from our sort of risk-based plan, we then move on to pages 39, and I suppose the real detail starts on page 40. This is our list of work which we are planning to do over the next 6 months. We split it down between the risk-based reviews first, and then the core assurances come afterwards. What I would always stress, as I said, we've got a lot of audits we could look at, so we have a further long list of things which could go on for the latter 6 months of 23, 24, and then beyond that, perhaps for another 4 years. So we have a complete potential list of audits that's known as an audit universe. So what we'll be looking from the committee is just to seek your opinion. If you feel there's anything else that you would like assurance on, it's a good opportunity to mention that. But as I say, we do have this agile plan and ongoing quarterly reports to the committee. So if you don't feel obliged to mention anything today, there's lots of opportunities to have those discussions about future work. On page 43, we also detail activities which contribute to improving governance, risk and control environments. These may not be specific what we'd call assurance or audits, but they are important pieces of work which add value, and it's just absolutely correct that we reflect that in our plan, so you get a flavour of what we do. And then finally, on the following page, we talk about other resource provisions. Those are other examples where we add value to the council, which will not be specific audits, but will contribute to my audit opinion and forming the annual governance statement at the end of the year. So that's the sort of what we've got lined up for the next 6 months. Then we go on to Appendix B, which is the progress update and opinion. So only just a couple of points that I would highlight there. On page 46 of your pack, so that's section 2, just to note that from a resources point of view, we've now currently got 1 vacancy in the team, which we're going to sort of recruit into that vacancy. But we can make use of agency workers if needed in the interim period. But just a big thanks to my team for helping deliver the plan during that period. It's very important just to make reference to the annual audit sort of opinion. So that's included on page 47. Overall, I have a reasonable level of assurance that controls are effective in the council. That is the same level as the previous year. On page 49, rather than go through lots of detail, we've listed the assurance work that we've done over sort of past 6 months, going back to September. And just to try and save a bit of paper, we've hyperlinked back to the reports which you, the committee, have already seen. So it's just a summary of some of the work we've done there. I suppose more observations looking back at that, some of the comments that I would make to the committee. It's positive to see we've increased assurance across a number of reviews. So overall it is looking quite positive. You'll see that it reflects a high proportion of grant work, and the nature of grant work is it's quite transactional work. So once the control's in place, it is likely to be quite either sort of like poor assurance or full assurance. So that council-wide this occasion, we do have a lot of full assurance ratings, but hopefully you can take that as some confidence that they've worked well. And the other thing, I think it's important to note, we've completed some new reviews. I like to stress this because these can be more challenging for the team to complete, because they're emerging areas and there's not a lot of historical guidance on how to tackle these. But I think it is important that we rise to that challenge to provide sort of relevant and timely assurance to the council. On page 50, just want to reflect the National Fraud Initiative work, because that is quite a lot of transactions to look at. So we've illustrated a chart in there which identifies the sort of volume of data that gets processed. It's quite a lot. Business grants, it's worth reflecting that, and I've included that on section 8 on page 51. Although the business grants have long since been allocated to all people, we have still been working on those over the past 6 months, because that's part of the post-assurance work. So that's about us providing assurance back to central government and then working with the National Audit Office. So that's been ongoing. I feel that hopefully we're at the end of that now, but it's definitely worth reflecting on that, because it's a significant chunk of work. Then probably moving on from there, I cannot provide a report without mentioning the public sector internal audit standards. It's important to reflect that we've maintained compliance with standards. One thing I would just make the committee aware of is that global internal audit standards are being reviewed at the moment, so we've consulted on that. The outcome of that work is inevitably going to feed through to our own UK public sector standards. We expect that to probably come out late 24. So although it's not an immediate thing that we need to be aware of, we obviously are watching it with keen interest to make sure that if we need to change the way that we deliver our services, we reflect those. And then just finally, we have the 3 appendices, the charter, a very important document because it sets out our right of access and how we work within the council, so it's very important to get your support on that. Our code of ethics, as internal auditors, we have to make sure that we follow good standards. That's the document that's changed presentation-wise this year. Just tried to hopefully, based on feedback, make it a little bit shorter and easier to read, because there was a little bit of duplication on there before. And then finally, just a glossary of terms, because we do use a lot of technical jargon in our profession, so hopefully that you can find that useful just to refer to. So yeah, that's the key points I want to bring out from the reports. Happy to take comments and questions.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. Very comprehensive overview, as always. Councillor Heather Williams, you wanted to comment.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering to what extent we normally have, officers can advise me when we normally get the Ombudsman report, because the annual review letter has been published. And I'm wondering, given that we had 83% of complaints upheld compared to 59% of similar organisations, what has been done to incorporate that in the future plan? Because from what I can see online, it tends to be kind of planning, and yet I don't see anything in the 6 months that refers to planning. I could be wrong. That seems to be something missing. Also, we are going obviously through a major trial at the moment. There seems to be no incorporation of that. I would expect to see internal audit looking at, structures, how robust that is, things like checking our officers, even though they're doing their working time, are they able to do the right amount of training and CPD? There seems to be a complete absence of that. Now, can that be incorporated? Because as it currently stands, I'm not happy. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Tully, you happy to respond?
Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, there's two things that I picked up from there. Planning, we have done some planning audits over the past sort of 24 months, I suppose. Planning income is the next one on our long-term list to look at. But, we also know they've also had their recent ISO accreditation. So I'm keen to have a look at that and take some assurance from that. But although it's not on the immediate 6-month plan, it is on the longer-term plan. With regards to the 4-day week, it's a fair question. What I'd say, although we've not got a specific order on that, obviously as part of the council, we have we're involved in what's going on. and people have come to us when it's been reviews of changes to processes and things like that. So we've been able to advise on sort of potential risks and hazards. So although there's not been a specific audit, yes, we are sort of somewhat involved in that. If it's something the committee feels strongly about, it'll be something I'll be willing to take away and look into doing a more specific audit review. But what I would stress is we've obviously got a lot of public scrutiny on this already, and I'll be reluctant to sort of duplicate any work that other people are doing, such as the Bennett Institute around performance management, because that might not be the best use of resources. But I'm happy to take comments from the committee on what you would be particularly interested in.
Thank you, Ms Tully. Would you like to come back, Councillor Williams?
With the greatest respect to the Bennett Institute, I expect the internal audit of this, council to be looking at council functions. We can't just outsource scrutiny and audit internally. So I would like to see that. I couldn't quite gather whether consideration has been given to the results of the Ombudsman report, because that's not great. We are outliers. So has that been looked at and included? And indeed, will that be coming, Chair, to us as it normally does? I appreciate we've got a heavy agenda today, which is might not be on this one. But has that been incorporated in the plan? Because, you know, it was not good to see us being out of kilter with the average.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I must confess, so I'm not familiar with the route which the Ombudsman's report would flow. I mean, presumably it ends up with Cabinet and potentially Council at some point, but is anyone in a position to advise on that? Has it come to us in the past, Councillor Williams?
Yeah, I think it has come here in the past. I haven't seen this year's letter, but you say it's been, as far as you're aware, it's been issued?
Yeah, I have a copy of it.
Certainly in the past it has come here, more for information and a bit of a debate. But,
fine. Well, we
something
can.
for September.
I'm happy to bring that to a future committee meeting. Sorry, Mr. Tully, you wanted to come back in.
Yeah, so I'll just add that, you know, when we compile the annual governance statement, that is a document which will feature external sources of assurance. That will be one of those. So we'll make reference to it in that document as well.
Thank you. I mean, perhaps when we consider the Ombudsman's report, we might, perhaps, Mr. Tully, you could be present when the committee discuss that, and if we feel there's something coming out of that that needs to be on the internal audit plan, perhaps we can discuss it then. Is that a sensible way forward, Councillor Williams?
Chair, as it currently stands, because to me, that's a document that should be used in putting the 6-month plan together, looking at that. It doesn't feel like that sort of happened. Also, it doesn't feel like the current activities of the council are included with the trial. So currently, I'm happy to support 5.2 in the recommendations of approving to support the Charter and Code of Ethics. I completely agree that should be endorsed by the committee, but I am not happy to vote or support for the audit plan and strategy. I would suggest that that's deferred to the next meeting for all the things that we've addressed to be incorporated, and then we can see it and see what that would actually look like, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'll consider your request. In the meantime, are there any further comments that members of the committee would like to make? Councillor Howell, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'm just following on really from what Councillor Williams has just said. It does seem to make sense to everybody that we don't plan until we know what needs to be done. And obviously this particular audit letter, or ombudsman letter, I should say rather, is a vital part of that, forming that new plan. And therefore I will vote against it, but I would rather vote that we defer that particular part now and put it together with using that as a future guidance for them to come in year.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chair. So I had two more general comments or questions. One about data analytics, and there is mention from time to time that the participation in the government scheme. I don't quite understand, and I don't think this is the place for a detailed explanation as to how we work with the government scheme, but I guess we're using baseline data against which, or into which we're inserting some of our own. But I just wanted to ask about the future direction of data analytics because it is very good value. You're collecting data, and if we're just referring to fraud for a moment, the possibility to detect fraud using data streams and appropriately formulated detection methods has huge potential. So I think it would be nice to feel, and I would like some reassurance that this investigation of data analytics is the first step towards something broader in scope and deeper in capability. So that's a very general thing, but perhaps I could invite a response on that question. And I've got a second one, but could we do the data analytics first?
Certainly. Mr. Tully, do you want to comment on the data analytics?
Happy to. I'm going to just say that I'd also like to come back on some of the comments that were just made previously as well. So
yes, I'm sort of minded that we might take a short adjournment just to confer as to how we want to tackle that. So let's come back to that in a minute and maybe just deal with the other comments first, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. So yes, data analytics, very, very important. There's lots of different ways we can do it, and of course AI is becoming quite an interesting tool as well now. So we have been doing it in some respects for many years as part through the National Fraud Initiative in terms of data matching. And a lot of that has risk-based approaches to the data. And what I encourage the team to do is whenever they commence an audit review, is they grab as much data as they can to do a sort of deep dive, because that will inform where best to focus their resources when it comes to testing. So we're trying to stay ahead of the game as much as we can. As part of our sort of SciS compliance, we have regular quarterly workshops as a team where we get together and look at different ways of working and new practices to adopt, and data analytics is one which features regularly in those training sessions. So we all sort of like develop lots of approaches and tools and share it with each other.
Through you, Chair. Is there any more we could do to encourage the take-up of data analytic methods, of taking best practice from elsewhere, and maybe that's using software solutions, established techniques that have been proven in other applications and so on. Just a general question as to how we can resource this process, but more efficiently perhaps.
So yeah, we do, as part of our training, we have peer network groups. And so we do link in with some other public sector organisations, and we've seen some really fascinating, interesting things which have been done by the National Audit Office. I have to be truthful and say, obviously their budget to do a lot of these things is a lot greater than ours, but there's certainly some tips and tricks which we pick up from them, and we try and adopt wherever we can. So we keep an eye on what we can do. Yeah.
Thank you. Would the committee be happy with a 5-minute adjournment? I'd just like to discuss this issue around whether there's stuff we want to take out of the Ombudsman's report, and I just think we're going to achieve that more quickly if we're not very carefully taking turns and bouncing it back and forth. So are the committee happy with just a 5-minute adjournment to discuss that? Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, and apologies for that adjournment, but it enabled a fruitful discussion, which I will now update you on. Before I do that, I want to make one final comment on this. I think I'm a little concerned at the suggestion, perhaps, that internal audit is being bombarded from all directions with requests from work, whether that's central government, whether that's this committee, whether that's proactively identifying risks, and that there's some concerns around the overall scope of what you're able to cover within a particular 6-month or 12-month period. So I would like perhaps to suggest to the head of internal audit and the chief operating officer that they consider whether the team is adequately resourced as it stands, and whether a business case needs to be prepared for additional resource into this team in light of the many challenges that are being thrown their way. So I'll leave that with their suggestion. In terms of the other comments that the committee have made, I'm going to propose that I add a recommendation, which will read as follows. The committee will recommend that the head of internal audit, in consultation with the chair of the committee, will adapt the audit plan to incorporate risks identified by the Ombudsman complaints. Councillor Heather Williams, you want to...
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate the inclusion of that. Obviously, that was one of two things that we were concerned about. The other thing, in relation to the 4-day week and training, has not been incorporated. So can I move that we take I and Roman numeral 1 and Roman numeral 2 separately? I'm happy to support Roman numeral 2, but I will vote against Roman numeral 1 on the basis that nothing to do with the 4-day week has been included at this time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I have heard your concerns, particularly around training in CPD as part of the 4-day week, and I will consider with other parts of the council if there's something we can add to the Agile Audit Plan at an appropriate moment in the trial, but I appreciate you're disappointed that it's not present today. Are there any further comments or concerns as part of this item? No. Well, thank you all for your comments and your frank views. I'm just going to find the exact recommendations. If you can bear with me for one moment. Thank you very much. So, the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee is requested to consider this report and the appendices. So there are 3 recommendations now. There is I, as written, approved the draft audit plan and strategy. Roman numeral 2, approved the supporting charter and the code of ethics. And Roman numeral 3, which is the new addition, which is that the head of internal audit, in consultation with the chair of the committee, will adapt the audit plan to incorporate risks identified by the Ombudsman for complaints. Can I have a seconder, sorry, for the inclusion of that proposal? Thank you, Councillor Sanford. So seconded. So I'm going to take each of these in turn. Are we all fairly clear with what's going on? Yes, I'm seeing some nods. Good. Right. So recommendation 1, so there will be votes on these. Recommendation 1 is to approve the draft audit plan and strategy. Can I see all those in favour of approving the draft audit plan? Thank you. Can I see those against? Thank you. Can I have the results of that vote, please?
4 in favour, 2 against.
Thank you, so that is carried. Recommendation 2, approve the supporting charter and code of ethics. Can I see those in favour, please? Thank you. And recommendation 3, the head of internal audit, in consultation with the chair of the committee, to adapt the audit plan to incorporate risks identified by the Ombudsman for complaints. Can I see all those in favour of that recommendation, please? Thank you very much. That concludes that item. We move on to item 8, which is an update on the topical corporate governance matters. Mr. Tully, if you could please present this report, bearing in mind I think we've probably covered a lot of this ground already, so happy to keep this fairly brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Committee, we are on page 71 of your packs now. This is our regular quarterly update. There isn't a lot to report this quarter in terms of content because it's being picked up in the other reports on the agenda. So we can go through this quite quickly. On page 72, I want to report 2 reviews which we've completed in the last quarter. Taxi licensing and also asset management land records. The asset management land records, of course, was requested specifically by this committee last year. That has got a full level of assurance. It was a challenging audit to do because it's a little bit of a case of known unknowns, so we had to do a little bit of technical work around that, but there was very much a positive outcome from that work, that we had assurance that we had a good knowledge of all the assets, the information was robust, and also the valuation was recent and updated accordingly. The other one, taxi licensing, this was a very topical audit review, demonstrating our agile plan in response to recent legislation which came out. So we wanted to make sure that the licensing team were sort of complying with that latest legislation. We can provide reasonable assurance they are doing that. They'd actually been demoing a similar system for a couple of years, so they were well skilled and versed. We did identify a couple of small level recommendations, and it's credit to the team that they worked with us and implemented them pretty much immediately. So we'll probably be able to say that once that final one is done, we're at a full level of assurance. But it's very pleasing to see that they've done that. We were well prepared. On page 74, we have the regular counter-fraud updates, the usual sort of statistics there that follow. I don't have anything to report on that myself. So I'll take us straight to the final page 78, which is training development and risk insights. Just 2 topical updates for the committee to be aware of. The first one being sort of latest updates on the audit accounts. I don't propose to talk about that because that was covered earlier on in the agenda with some more information with the letter from Minister Rowley. But the second point there, just to be aware of, there is a new sort of proposed legislation coming in from the Home Office about preventing fraud in the organisation. This is not just councils, this is all business. At this stage, we're expecting further clarification information and what that means, but I thought it was helpful to raise your awareness of it at this early stage. I think on the whole it's probably a positive thing, but once the sort of further information is published, we can then just make sure that we're treating that accordingly and see if we need to make any changes to our internal processes. Difficult to say, but I kind of anticipate it will probably function like the Bribery Act. It's probably about us undertaking a risk assessment and demonstrating we have reasonable controls in place to prevent it happening, because of course you cannot always prevent things going wrong. It's about demonstrating you've got proportionate controls in place. So just to make you aware of that, and that's everything in that report. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. I was very pleased to see the asset management and land records coming back. I know that's a piece of work that this committee took particular interest in. So thank you for completing that piece of work and a really positive outcome. Just on the taxi licensing, I'm aware this is obviously a very live issue. So you've identified these 2 medium actions that needed to be undertaken. Did you say that you have assurance that they've already, because a medium doesn't necessarily happen immediately, so I just wanted to clarify the assurance that those have actually happened.
Thank you. Yes, one has been implemented. I expect probably the other one has, but I've been away for the last 2 weeks, so I cannot actually confirm that, but it was relatively quick change, so it probably has done. If it hasn't, I'd expect it to be done very soon.
Yeah, thank you. I think maybe if you could check in when you have a spare moment and just ensure that that's taken place. Are there any comments on this quarterly update? Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Tully, the number of live investigations, 63, seems quite high. Is there a block that's preventing these being concluded, or have you got any further information?
Thank you, Councillor Sanford. It may be Mr. Maddock for this. That's his team.
Yeah, so we have seen an increase in referrals, and we think that's partly due to the key amnesty. So we have got an increase in live cases ongoing. The team are working through those, the investigators are working through those. I think since this report was compiled, we've had what we call our sanctions panel to look at some of the cases, and some have been put forward for prosecution. So, yeah, so we have seen an increase in cases, and I'm not overly surprised. And it's interesting to note that actually the highest number of referrals were actually in relation to housing fraud, which was where the key amnesty was aimed at.
Thank you. Thanks for that update, and I appreciate I've messed things up by moving the key amnesty to the end. But Councillor Heather Williams.
Thank you, Chair, and I'm sure we'll let you off the key amnesty issues. We've all read the documents. So what I was going to say is that actually a number of cases, 63, but I think that's a positive thing in that people are reporting. I would actually be very, very nervous if we were only seeing 1 or 2. I would feel that it's not actually, the programme isn't working, because the reality is, unfortunately, and in the current economic climate, there will be an increase of this sort of issue. I think anything that helps to stamp out fraud, I'm using my words very carefully, it's not all about prosecution. Prosecutions are needed, and they're needed to set an example. But for me, there is more than just a financial reason to go after fraud. There is a moral reason. This is taxpayers' money. We do not have money. This council has no money of its own. It belongs to the taxpayer. And I think there is a moral obligation and to prosecute, not persecute. I'm trying so carefully with my words here. To prosecute, to not because of the anything to do with the individuals that are doing it, but to make the point that we will not tolerate defrauding the taxpayer. I'd also say that I know there are always going to be pressures and budget pressures, but I think this area deserves the resources that it needs, because we will never be able to calculate how much has been stocked as deterrent. So I really would stress that 63, actually for me, I'm pleased to see that. And I'd also encourage, I know we've had it before, but a reminder to members as well, as councillors, we often will come across or see things or hear things that more than most. And I think that it's a duty on all of us to, if we are nervous or think something is wrong, then we should be reporting it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Yeah,
Mr. Maddox,
of course, we've got the training later today, where we can look at some of these issues and talk these things through. So,
no, I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you, Mr. Maddox. Are there any further comments on this report? Excellent. So we have been asked to note this report, which we have done so. So we move on to item 9, which is independent members. This is for the committee to consider whether we should include an independent member on the committee. Could I ask Mr. Tully to please present this report in the first instance? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. We are now on page 79 of our agenda packs. It really is as simple as the Chair introduced. It's for the committee to decide whether we want to appoint an independent member. To help make that sort of decision, we've outlined some of the information in the report. So starting on page 82, where we get to Appendix A, we've highlighted some of the benefits of independent members. That is based on professional practice and guidance, which is out there now. We also include on page 82 historical evaluation, because I think it's positive to reflect that the committee has considered this before in the past. At the time, we didn't feel it was appropriate, but we committed to continually reviewing this going forwards. But most recently, in March of this year, when we actually reviewed the committee by undertaking a self-assessment to the latest professional guidance from CIPFA, we thought it's appropriate to actually now review whether that would be a good time to appoint an independent person. Some of the professional guidance and best practice is laid out on the following page on 83. There's 3 things there which I've highlighted. There's the Sir Tony Redmond review, which was published back in sort of 2019. Then there was a CIPFA position statement, which came out, and they highlighted it would be best practice to actually include potentially two members. And then finally, there was the CIPFA guidance, which we used most recently to evaluate our own committee. On the following page 84, we highlight the process and potential challenges. So if we do approve this as a committee, we will need to make constitutional changes. And it is worth recognising that there will be potential challenges. Even if we agree to go forth and do this, of course, there's no guarantee we find a suitable candidate. But let's hope we can. What we've also included on page 85, and this is relatively similar to what the committee was in a couple of years ago, is a sort of role description for the independent person. As well as that, it also highlights the expected skills and competencies that we would expect them to have. So I think just hopefully that summarises it, and happy to take comments or questions. I think between myself, Peter, and John Murphy's online, we can probably hopefully pick up most questions.
Thank you. I'd like to open this report to comments. I've got a pretty open mind about this at the moment. So, Councillor Howell.
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, Chairman, I'm not going to say I'm happy with this, because I'm not. Because in the end, we are the ones who are elected, and we are the ones who are... And I think it'd be fair to say, as this committee tries to be as non-political as possible, because none of us want us to be caught out in anything. So I'm not happy with this. However, upon saying that, it looks like this is going to be brought in anyway when Parliament time allows, as it says. So we may as well bite the bullet and go for it. I don't think they should have voting rights because they haven't been elected. But I think it all encapsulates to me on page 84 in paragraph 39. And that's going to be the issue. We need somebody who's going to be able to sit here and from day one to be able to know what they're doing with regards to local government finance and also what the committee works without increasing extra work where it's not needed. So it's a tall order, and the person should have not have any political background. So, you know, ideally not a member of any particular party. I think we've got to bite the bullet and go for it, but it's not something I'm, you know, I'm going to be a cheerleader for.
Thank you, Councillor Howell, for those reflections. Councillor Heather Williams.
I'd echo that. I'm not a fan of people that haven't been elected sitting at council meetings in that capacity. We have officers to support us and to advise us. I think we need assurance that there wouldn't be voting rights, definitely, and obviously non-political. And I'm sort of looking through the benefits and seeing what benefits we would actually get from it. Because it says about political cycles. I appreciate, actually, if you're a council that's going out in thirds, you've got a lot of turnover. You know, there are some councils that change sort of control on an annual basis. But for us, we are all out every 4 years. There might be the odd by-election, but it's pretty consistent. So I don't think it would help. I don't think it's, you know, overly going to be beneficial or needed. But as Councillor Howell says, you know, better to do it now probably and have a bit more control over the situation. The skills of this person, as we said, is a tall order, and I think recruitment is going to be difficult, given that the allowance, not many people are going to want to sit here for £1,100. You look at our allowances, we must be mad to do what we're doing. So I think it will be difficult. I think my concern at the moment is with the recruitment. What happens if we can't get the right person? Because my worst case scenario is we put somebody in because we feel we have to. So there's only one application. And do we have to fill, or can we have a provision that means, do you know what, if we haven't got the right person, we can go without. I'd much rather have nobody than the wrong person, and that's my real fear. And also, how would this person be selected? What is the recourse if we find it's not working? There's lots of details that I think would be needed, and I appreciate there is some background to this, but I suppose the practical nature of my personality type, Chair, is thinking we need get-out clauses for if this doesn't work, because it's only a small amount, but it's still, as we said, still taxpayer money. We want it well used. Yes, I feel, as Councillor Howell said, sort of pushed into this rather than really particularly wanting it.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I'll come back to officers for any comments in a moment, if that's right. But these are very helpful interjections. So thank you both. Do any other members of the committee want to come in? Councillor Sanford, and then I'll come to you, Councillor Stobart.
Thank you, Chair. The paper refers to independent member or members. I think more than one independent member would make it too top-heavy in terms of this committee. So I think if we do go down this route, it should be just one independent member. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a good point. I think this committee is a very effective size, I feel, at the moment, and I'm not sure I'd want to add 2 independent members into that, but perhaps Councillor Stobart is here to tell me otherwise.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't want to dwell on that particular point, Chair, but let me address the other things. We might come back to that. I think having an independent person around will jog us out of the potential for groupthink. You know, we sit together as a committee over quite long periods, and for somebody to raise a question, which might be tricky, but it can take us in a slightly different direction, which might be beneficial. So I think, you know, all the case, and particularly the SIPFA recommendation for an independent person, I think is in that direction. They talk about technical expertise. And so being able to pose a question, I think, or challenge some thinking would be appropriate. And it's beneficial, you know, where you see independent experts in fields, then that is their role. Now, there is the potential for it all to go seriously wrong, you know, if somebody is dominating, and depending on personality type. So I think that implies a good relationship, for example, with the chair, so there is a good understanding, and you know, following along from Councillor Williams' points, to have appropriate means of letting somebody go, you know, if it's really not working. So I think that's important. If you could get to, I'm inclined to go along with Councillor Sanford's point that 2 would make this council, make the committee, I beg your pardon, just too top heavy with independent expertise. But I think 1, you know, well chosen, who's able to challenge and has a good relationship with the chair, fits us in obviously with good practice, and I think could be of great benefit to the committee.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. So thank you. That's been a really helpful discussion. I'm going to bring in some of the officers in just a moment. I think so. Firstly, on the number, I agree. I think if this is something we pursue, that at most 1 is to be preferred rather than looking to appoint 2. I appreciate that is what's recommended in the SIPFA Code of Guidance, but I think applying it to the specifics of this council and this committee, I think 1 is a reasonable situation. I mean, I agree with quite a lot of what Councillor Howell and Councillor Heather Williams had to say. I do feel rather pushed into this rather than necessarily wanting to lead from it, but you know, it does feel slightly like the writing's on the wall, and we need to, you know, and there would be perhaps some benefits to being a little proactive about it rather than absolutely being pushed into it. Sorry, Councillor Howell.
Yeah, Chairman, I agree. I think we are pushed into this, and it's not something I want to do, but, you know, hey-ho. The only thing I think is that whoever we get, whatever the criteria is, they've really got to know local government finance from the outset, okay? Because otherwise we're paying, I don't know how much money it'll be for them to sit here and look pretty. I mean, that's not their job. Their job is to actually do some work, okay? And I think that's going to be the big part of it all. Now, how you interview somebody for that, I mean, that's up for others to decide, or maybe we all do it, but, you know, and they've got to be used to coming into a speaking in here and being online at the same time. So there's no wallflowers allowed, yeah? So I don't know what, if accountants, I'm not saying that accountants are wallflowers, I would never say that, especially not local government ones, but we do need somebody who's happy to challenge and stick up their hand when the rest of us are going to put our hand up a different way. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. I should also just reflect on some comments I've had outside of the committee meeting, which have pointed out that although at the moment I think this committee is a really excellent balance of professional accountants and also definitely not professional accountants, and we have quite a good mix at the moment, there's no guarantee that that would always be the case in the organisation, and that, you know, there's obviously no requirements for councillors or any councillors to be accountants, and so perhaps we shouldn't depend upon that particular resource in perhaps the way that we do at the moment. And that was an additional reason. Councillor Heather Williams.
Sorry, Chair, just on your comments there. Yes, finance and understanding finance is really important, but there is, because we start with audit, but there is the corporate governance side as well. And I do think if we're looking for somebody, we need them to understand finance completely. Obviously, you and I are very biased in that, in our preference for the financial side, given our occupations. But I do think it needs to be somebody that understands local government and the governance side as well. And we are sometimes, because of the pressures we've had on the financial accounting, I think we are sometimes in danger of looking more on that than the other side, as it were. So sorry to sort of interrupt. Obviously, because I'm potentially a wallflower, as Councillor Howell said, so I'll just demonstrate that I'm very much not. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Yes, I've been called many things. That's some worse, some better, I think. So I'm going to turn to officers here. I think what I want to understand is what we need to decide today and what the options are. And I think specifically, what I'm minded, and I'm happy for feedback on this, is that we should seek changes to the Constitution that give us the power and the right, but not the obligation to appoint an independent member. So give us the mechanism to do so, but not require it. And then we can think about how we go about sort of advertising, interviewing and selecting an appropriate candidate, but all with a backdrop of, you know, this is a nice to have rather than something that's kind of crucial to the committee. So I don't know, Mr. Murphy, as our monitoring officer, can we frame this in the Constitution in such a way as to give us that kind of maximum flexibility?
Thank you, Chair, and I've been following the conversation and I have read the report. I suppose the answer is going to be, it depends. The easy bit is to work backwards by saying any change to the Constitution must be by full council. And prior to that, it'll be something that goes to civic affairs. So there's quite a lead up to any change. As for the specifics of the empowerment, you know, your discretion or an ability to choose, that for me would be a matter of wording that we could look to make in the change to the Constitution. But I think that's something we can explore. But I see no reason why we can't try and give the committee some flexibility in terms of what they want to do.
Thank you. In terms of things like I'll come to you in just a second, thank you. In terms of how specific the Constitution needs to be on this matter, do we need to agree things like the length of term or the length of service or the job description or any of that, or can that be kept out of the Constitution and agreed kind of separately? I guess I want to put the minimum possible into the Constitution, because obviously then we're tied to that, and keep as much as possible within the flexibility. Is that a kind of reasonable way to proceed, would you advise?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'd welcome the thoughts of my fellow officers, but my personal view would be that we try to minimise the changes that we make to the Constitution. So, for example, on issues of the details of the appointment, so to speak, I think there is an advantage to being flexible and keeping things out of the Constitution, such as, for example, whether it's allowance or terms of office. But that would be my preference, the principle I would bring to what changes do we need to make and what don't we need to make.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. Sorry, some of the councillors, I think, wanted to come back in.
I think it's fair to say that both of us are on civic affairs,
Yeah,
so we ought to declare that straight away. We're both in civic affairs. And although it is not, I don't think it should be mandatory, I think it would be fair to say that it would be a preference for me if the person lived in, was on the electoral roll in South Cambridgeshire, or for that matter, in Cambridgeshire. That's a preference for me that I think we would like to highlight to civic affairs. It's up to them in the end to make that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Having said all of that, I think if we turn to the recommendations or the kind of the options are set out on page 80, I believe, if I'm in the right place. And so the options as written are sort of A, do nothing, B, commence the process for appointing an independent member, or C, commence the process for appointing more than one independent member. I don't really know how best to capture what we've agreed. In a sense, I want to go with option B, but have it say something more like, commence the process for constitutional changes to enable the potential appointment of an independent member is kind of, I feel, where we've kind of got to. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick thing, sort of considering this, Councillor Howell and myself will abstain at this stage because we're members of Civic Affairs, so then we can vote when it comes to Civic Affairs, and we're not predetermined by a vote here. We've expressed some opinions of regret having it, but neither of us have spoken really about how the Constitution should be phrased, and we think it's probably wise that we actually remove ourselves from that part of the debate so that we don't have our hands tied later on. But of course we are listening, and I'm sure you would expect us to reflect views from this committee when we represent the Council of Civic Affairs.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. That's helpful to know. So are the committee happy with that sort of slightly modified option B? I think, because as written, it sort of commits us to appoint someone, and I think rather we want to start the process to give ourselves the power to do so, if in fact we can find the right person. Is that Councillor Stobart?
Chair, would you mind repeating the wording, please?
Let's see if I can remember it. Thank you. So I think, let me frame this correctly. Commence the process for constitutional change to give Audit and Corporate Governance the power to appoint an independent member.
I think from my point of view that would be fine. I think not being too prescriptive, I think we're heading in that direction, aren't we, of minimal change to the Constitution, but enough to give the Chair and anybody else in authority the right for decisive, or the possibility for decisive action if it's needed. So that always needs to be in place, but I would agree with the minimum and then interpretation in the hands of, appropriately appointed people. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Stobart. Councillor Harvey.
Yeah, I can't completely remember what your sentence was, but do we want? I mean, you want to be a bit careful about in who that power is vested. I mean, is that once we've created that power, is yes. That the council, or is that this committee, or the?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, potentially where I said the power for the Audit and Corporate Governance Committee to appoint an independent member, I should perhaps say the full council to appoint an independent member. Thank you, Councillor Harvey. That's an excellent suggestion. Are we happy then to give officers that approach? I mean, this isn't sort of the formal decision. Like we've said, the formal decision is going to come to Civic Affairs. Oh, sorry, Mr. Tully.
Thank you, Chair. If it helps the committee, the recommendation at paragraph 6 is worded such that after sort of progressing this, because we didn't want to do too much work in advance of a decision being made today, that it's up for the Chair and the Chief Finance Officer to progress this forward and make necessary arrangements. So that hopefully implies a degree of flexibility moving forwards. And secondly, if it's only assurance for the committee, just to let you know that I have worked at another council where there has been an independent person for a number of years, and despite that committee being very well experienced, having a lot of knowledge, they do comment that he adds a lot of value. So having worked in that scenario, it can be quite productive.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. So, so I think we're happy to vote on this now. So the recommendation is it's not actually written in paragraph 6, is it? Let's see what I've got in my. Yes. So I think the wording is probably sort of option 12B as amended. So commence the process for seeking changes to the Constitution to enable full council to appoint an independent member. Can I see all those? Oh, sorry, Councillor Stobart.
Does this mean we're going with recommendation 6, paragraph 6?
Yes. Yes, it's sort of 6 merged with 12B. Yes. Thank you. Can I see all of those in favour of that recommendation, please? Thank you. All those against, and all those abstaining.
Chairman, we're not voting.
Not voting. Understood. Thank you. just before I move on, the only thing I just spotted at the end there was that in the role description, under the additional information, item 10, we need to be clear that that shouldn't exclude people who live in the district and therefore pay council tax and do have a relationship with the authority, because they will probably, as Councillor Howell has indicated, it would be good to have someone with some local knowledge. We wouldn't want to rule them out. Thank you very much, committee. It's 5 minutes to 12. The remaining items are around the Treasury management, both the annual report and quarterly performance. There's the 6-month strategic risk report, and there's also the key amnesty item. And we have scheduled training at 1 o'clock on the important issue of counter fraud. So my suggestion would be to take the Treasury management issues, Treasury management items today, although perhaps starting with the quarterly report, as that's more up to date, and to focus on that perhaps rather than the annual report, and to defer the strategic risk report and the key amnesty to our September meeting. Is the rest of the committee happy with that? Am I prioritising the right things? Well, I might start with number 11 just because it's slightly more, that's the most up-to-date item. Councillor Williams.
Chair, if I can suggest that we take number 11 and then, if it's not going to be a problem, defer the others. Just conscious we're starting at 1, we will need to, have some sort of comfort and subsistence break in between.
Yes, it's hungry work, this. So I suggest, yes, so I'm going to propose that we defer items 6, 10 and 12 to the September meeting, and that we'll take item 11 now and then close the meeting. Are we all happy with that? Good. Moving swiftly on to item 11 then is the Treasury Management Performance Report. Please can Mr. Maddock present this report.
Thank you, Chair. It follows on a little bit from the annual report, but I don't think it matters that we can consider them separately. So this is a new requirement to report to this committee on a quarterly basis. You may recall that previously it was a half-yearly basis. It's probably, being the first quarter of the year, there's not a massive amount to report. You'll see from the table on our investment activity at paragraph 18 on page 105, you'll see that our investments have changed slightly, gone down a little bit. We've obviously seen the impact of increasing interest rates when it comes to our borrowings. There's reference to that in paragraph 23. Sorry, not 23, I might help if I read the right paragraph. 29, you can see that our borrowings have stayed static in the first quarter, but they are down 10 million compared to earlier in 22-23. We have our budget monitoring table there. It gives an indication of what our budget is for this year on particular Treasury-related items and what our forecast outturn is. Again, it's quite early in the year, so it's quite difficult to really produce anything different, other than we're pretty clear now, particularly because our borrowings are 10 million lower than we thought they were going to be. It seems pretty clear that our interest payments will actually be less than we originally budgeted. Even though interest rates might go a bit higher, the fact that we've got less borrowings will counteract that and a bit. So our estimate for interest payments is down at 1.5 million as opposed to 2 million in the original budget. I don't think there's anything too much other than that to report. I think I'd question, particularly quarter one, I'd question the usefulness of doing it on a quarterly basis, but it is a requirement, and I guess going through the process does add some value. So it's there for members to note and comment on as they wish, really.
Thank you, Mr. Maddock. I mean, my reading of it is that we're still sort of managing to borrow at the kind of 3.5%, and we're earning more like 4.5%, 5% on our investments, as long as that continues and that we're not exposed to undue risk, there aren't kind of major concerns here. But I'll come to Councillor Heather Williams, who wishes to come in.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering whether we have we've got a long list, haven't we, of people that we invest with and don't invest with, whether BlackRock is on there. Is BlackRock or anything, any of our documents at the moment where we could potentially have money tied up with?
I don't believe so. Under the annual report, we have a list of the counterparties we used. This is at page 98. So I don't believe I've seen them on there.
I haven't. I just wanted to check in case there's anything historical. Chair, just for context, that there are some councils that do have BlackRock listed. Given the recent news, I think in this council's priorities, it might be best to ensure that we don't have any ties with them until we know exactly what's going on there.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further comments on this this quarterly update? Thank you very much. We've been asked to note the report, which we have done. As previously mentioned, we're going to defer those other items to our September meeting, when hopefully there haven't been spanners thrown in various works by various other parties before then, but we'll manage if they do. Thank you all very much for your attendance here today. We covered a lot of very useful ground and there was some very good discussion, so thank you all very much. The date of the next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, the 27th of September. I'm aware that the forward plan for this committee has been changed perhaps from what members were expecting, in that meetings are now moving around different days of the week and are not on a Thursday as I believe they always have been. My suggestion is that I would like to request officers to look again at the forward calendar of dates and return these meetings to their regular slot on an appropriate Thursday in the month, unless any members have an issue with that, simply because the new dates are presenting a lot of clashes for several members of the committee. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. Normally dates are put in the calendar, the annual calendar that comes to full council, and sort of set. So I don't know what we can do around that, because it normally gets adopted by full council. But did we not for audit when we did the calendar? But I would be very supportive of us doing that annual calendar earlier than May, because that would, if you think I'm not funny, the summer, times like this, we have meetings, we're not giving much notice, and it is a time when that does create a lot of issues, some for childcare, some for leave, annual leave, and the like. So if we're looking at adopting things earlier for the calendar, I'd be very supportive of that.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Yes, I think it is within this committee's remit as to when it decides to meet. So we can change the dates, and we can look to perhaps try and nail down some dates earlier in the year, as you say, particularly around these summer months. But I mean, I note, for instance, that there are meetings later in the year because it's moved to a Tuesday that clashes with the county council, full council, which is obviously going to knock out at least 2 members of this committee. And there are several other dates which are provoking county council clashes as well. So does anyone object if it returns to a regular Thursday slot?
I've no objection, but can we also look at the GCP meetings, because this committee's clashed with that in the past as well?
Certainly.
Because there are workshops, it's not just the public meetings.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, so the next meeting is scheduled is on Wednesday, the 27th of September, but please be aware that there may be communication in the coming weeks to change that. And that'll be announced in all the usual ways. Thank you all very much. I declare the meeting closed.